I grew up in Israel where biblical stories were taught in school as history, much like American children would learn about, say, the Civil War. Moses and the burning bush, an actual event. Garden of Eden, look it up on a map, it's there. Noah's Ark, that happened. The Bible was real, and the children of Israel, well, they were always fucking up. The story of the Jews' exodus from Egypt was on my mind in the aftermath of my divorce, or what I like to call my 40 years in the desert. For those of you unfamiliar with the tales of my people, you want I should explain. The children of Israel are slaves in Egypt. Eventually, this gets on God's radar, and he sends Moses to liberate them. In the Bible, Moses asks Pharaoh to let his people go, and spoiler alert, the Pharaoh tells him to fuck off. Enter God, who unleashes 10 plagues on Egypt that range from turning all the water, including the Nile, into blood, to frogs raining from the sky, and concluding with the final blow, the killing of all the firstborn of the Egyptians, while simultaneously sparing all the firstborn of the Jews. Well, I don't have to tell you that that last one is quite a kick in the balls, and the Pharaoh finally relents. But by that point, the Jews in Egypt lost sight of themselves. They bought into the idea that they were slaves, and so they acted like it. I spent 2 decades of my life slowly losing sight of who I was, and I acted like it too. I met my ex-husband when we were both 20. He was an immigrant from Eastern Europe, and I had immigrated from Israel, and the fact that we had somehow found our way to each other made it feel even more like he was my beshert, which is the Jewish word for the other half of your soul. He was a law student at the time, handsome, charismatic, funny, smart, excellent earning potential. And most attractive to me back then, aloof and emotionally distant. So naturally, I fell in love with him. It was apparent very early on in our relationship that this man had a great capacity for cruelty. And unfortunately, in my young mind, I confused that cruelty with strength, and I needed someone strong because I thought I wasn't. We married, we had 3 children, we moved away from our families in Minneapolis to find our fortunes in California, and to a certain extent we did. The kids were in private school, the cars more expensive, but our relationship grew poor. Our stuff got nicer, but we did not. It was little things at first. He publicly joked that he had plucked me out of the gutter, found me in a pool of my own sick. He would make fun of me being a health nut and the food that I ate, and from there it escalated so incrementally that by the time he was texting with his 20-something secretary and cleverly changing her name to a man's in his phone, and staying out all night and our fights occasionally becoming physical, it actually seemed kind of normal. He was good at covering his tracks, and I was good at denial. We were perfect for each other. I got better and better at making excuses for him. I spoke up less. I pushed back. I never pushed back. I knew my place. When I think of myself during that time, I think about the Bible again and how Joseph's family, who were the first Israelites to settle in Egypt, came there by invitation. So how is it that the Jews went from welcome guests to building pyramids? And how did I wind up feeling enslaved by my own marriage, by an institution and relationship I willingly chose? And why the hell did I stay? Maybe because, as is true of almost everything in life, things weren't all bad. He was very charming when he was happy. He was smart, and he made me laugh when he used different voices and accents when reading Harry Potter books to our oldest. He was easy to love when things were good. They just weren't good very often. Then, one day, I stumbled upon a secret bank account. I figured, This must be the account into which he was siphoning money in preparation for leaving me for the secretary. When I asked why I didn't know about the account, he snapped back, "What do you want, Adit? What do you want me to say? What would you say if I accused you of something like this? Adit, you're paranoid." I wish I could tell you that this was the conversation that caused me to leave. Actually, I wish I could tell you that I broke up with my ex-husband even before we were married on a night that he left me with no way home at a work-related party because he thought I disrespected him in front of some colleagues. I used to imagine how it would have felt to have gone home that night and said to him, "I'm leaving you, and I'm keeping the ring." I did not say that. I came home and I tearfully tried to explain myself to him. I didn't leave then, and in fact, I stayed for another year and a half after I found the bank account. During that year, I slowly mind-fucked myself into a low-grade suicidal funk. I started to think, maybe I am crazy. Why am I doubting my husband? I'm too hard on him. I'm pushing him away. Despite the fact that I was a seasoned medical professional with a background in clinical research and could set bones and sew your face back on, if you asked me to describe myself back then, I would have said things like incompetent and disorganized and pathetic. My ex-husband never used those words, but he didn't need to. I got the message. When we finally decided to lawyer up and end our marriage, there was talk of discovery, and that's where both sides of a legal battle spill all their secrets. My husband called me and said, "Well, since you're going to find out about this anyway, I might as well tell you about the account." The secret account. Turns out there was $4,000 in it, and when I asked why, he hesitated and then said, "Well, for a while I thought about seeing prostitutes. But I never went through with it." He tried to defend himself, but I couldn't hear. My brain flooded with relief at the realization I wasn't crazy. The account I had found was a secret account for nefarious purposes. I was right all along. "Wait a minute," I said. "Did you just tell me that you have a prostitution slush fund?" "Oh, stop being so dramatic," he said. "I told you I didn't use it." The conversation escalated. That sick feeling in my stomach rose. Self-doubt and loathing began to creep in. And I realized what this man and his constant gaslighting had done to me after 20 years. Would he ever really hear me? And more importantly, did it matter? Did I need his admission to believe what I had already known was true? So back to the children of Israel. They hightail it out of Egypt, and as soon as they come upon the Red Sea, they realize that the Pharaoh has changed his mind and is in hot pursuit of his slaves. Faced with this new challenge, the children of Israel start to bitch and kvetch and say things like, "Why did you bring us here to die? And why did we leave Egypt?" And despite all this grateful whining, God parts the Red Sea. All the Jews pass through it, and then God unparts it while the Egyptians are still in it, and they all perish. What always fascinated me about this story is that even after all those Passover miracles, at the first sign of difficulty, the Jews just want to go running back to what they know, even if that's slavery. I used to think that the Exodus story was about a pharaoh or frogs or burning bushes, but it's really a story about fear and conditioning. The slaves were used to abuse and slavery. It wasn't good, but it was what they knew. Me, I was a prisoner and a hostage of the past. Since childhood, I had been belittled and dominated and hit and even sexually assaulted. I knew how to be prey. Hell, I was amazing at it. Facing life without an abuser, now that felt crazy. Who the fuck was I going to be? I was terrified. But a moment came when I decided to trade in the security of pain for the terror of the unfamiliar, for freedom. I also knew that it took a long time because freedom is hard. It's a skill, and I'm still learning. And while it seems like that should be easy, I assure you it is not. The children of Israel wandered around the desert for 40 years before they found the promised land. And not bragging, but it took me half the time. It took them 40 years because a generation of people who knew themselves only as slaves had to die off and be replaced by a generation who knew only freedom. And lest you think that this is the end of Israelite shenanigans, they don't even set foot in the promised land before they get into hot water with God again. There are actually 4 more books of Jewish tomfoolery that follow the book of Genesis, which contains this Exodus story. And I find that a great comfort. It's been 7 years since I left my ex-husband, and it has taken the better part of that time lots of therapy, a couple of ayahuasca ceremonies, and the love of several amazing friends to learn how not to be a victim. And most days, I would say, I am a free woman.
Oh, give it up for Adit Zelkind.